Welcome back to Priestess Initiations, the Goddess Coven. I'm Casey, and this is episode 4. Today we're talking about shadow, but not the way you've probably heard it before. Shadow isn't just the bad parts of yourself. It's not just your rage, your shame, your wounds. Shadow is everything you've disowned, and that includes your power, your creativity, your wildness, your sexuality, your joy. The work isn't to fix your shadow. The work is to reclaim it, to integrate it, to let it make you whole. This is Jungian depth work. This is what the goddesses teach. And this is where real transformation begins. Let's start with what shadow actually is, because most people get this wrong. Carl Jung, the founder of depth psychology, talked about the shadow as everything we've rejected, denied, or hidden about ourselves. It's the parts of us that we decided were unacceptable, unsafe, or too much. But here's the key. The shadow isn't just negative traits. It's anything and everything we've disowned. Yes, your rage is in the shadow. Your grief, fear, shame, those are there too. But so is your power, your brilliance, your sexuality, your wildness, your creativity, your joy. We don't just hide the bad parts. We hide anything that got us punished, rejected, or shamed. Anything that threatened our belonging. Maybe you were told you were too much, too loud, too intense, too emotional, too sexual, too creative. So you learned to be less. You pushed those parts into the shadow. Maybe you were told you weren't enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough, not successful enough. So you pushed your confidence, your pride, your self-worth into the shadow because it felt dangerous to own them. The shadow is everything you learned wasn't safe to be. And here's what Jung understood. You can't kill the shadow. You can't transcend it. You can't heal it away. The only way through is integration. Bringing those disowned parts back into consciousness, back into your body, back into your life. This is what initiation does. Initiation breaks you open, so the shadow can't stay hidden anymore. It forces you to face what you've been avoiding, and that's terrifying because the shadow feels like death. It feels like if you let it out, it will destroy everything. But the truth is, the shadow is your medicine. I'm going to say that again. The shadow, everything you've disowned, is your medicine. The parts you've hidden are the parts you need most to become whole. The shadow is golden. And Jung talks about this as the golden shadow. Because there is gold in the shadow, not just wounds to heal, not just pain to process, actual power, creativity, aliveness, magic that you've been denying yourself. Think about the women or other people in your life who've been called too much. The ones with Medusa energy. Powerful, intense, unapologetic. That too muchness, that's not a flaw. That's your power. But it's been pushed into the shadow because it threatened people, so you learn to dim it. Or think about rage. We're taught that rage, especially feminine rage, is ugly, destructive, inappropriate, rude. We love to use that word with women. Don't be rude. So we push it into the shadow. But rage is medicine. Rage tells you where your boundaries have been violated, Rage is your no. It's the energy that says no more. Rage is Lilith, and Lilith is sovereign. Or sexuality, right? So many of us, especially women, have pushed our sexuality into the shadow because we learned it was shameful, dangerous, only acceptable in certain narrow contexts. And in those contexts, ironically, it's revered. We live in a very confusing time to be sexual and a woman. But sexuality is life force. It's creativity. It's Lilith and Inanna and Aphrodite. It's sacred. Or even joy, right? Let's talk about joy. Sometimes joy gets pushed into the shadow because we don't feel like we deserve it. Or because being joyful feels unsafe when the world is painful. Or because we learned that happiness makes us a target. The shadow holds everything you need to become who you actually are. Not the acceptable version, not the version that makes everyone comfortable. The real you. Messy. Powerful. Wild. Radiant. Fierce. Soft. All of it. Shadow work isn't about becoming a better person. It's about becoming a whole person. And wholeness includes the parts of yourself you've been taught to hate, hide, or deny. This is what the goddesses teach. Persephone descends into the shadow, the underworld, and becomes the queen. She doesn't transcend it. She rules it. Lilith lives in the wilderness of the shadow and refuses to come back. Medusa's gaze turns you to stone if you can't face your shadow. Kali destroys the false self to reveal the shadow underneath. The goddesses don't fear the shadow. They are the shadow. And they're calling you to stop fearing yours. Okay, so let's talk about spiritual bypassing because it feels important, and this is where a lot of spiritual work goes wrong. Spiritual bypassing is using spiritual concepts to avoid dealing with what's actually happening in your life, your body, your psyche. It's using positive thinking to avoid grief. It's using forgiveness to avoid rage. It's using everything happens for a reason to avoid sitting with the unfairness and pain of what you've been through. And love and light spirituality is one of the biggest forms of bypassing, and there's a lot of it out there right now. But don't get me wrong, love is real. Light is real. But if your spirituality only includes love and light, only includes the positive emotions and experiences, you're bypassing half of what it means to be human. You're bypassing the soul's journey of learning. I really believe that our souls are here to learn what it is to have a body, which means being spirit embodied, to feel the full spectrum of human emotion. So the issue isn't love. It's not light. Spirituality should include that. But if it only includes that, you're bypassing the shadow. And here's the problem. What you resist persists. What you push into the shadow doesn't go away. No matter how many times you do it, it's not going away. It just gets stronger, more distorted, and more unconscious. It starts running your life from behind the scenes. If you refuse to feel your rage, it comes out as passive aggression, chronic resentment, or it turns inward as depression. If you refuse to feel your grief, It becomes numbness, disconnection, an inability to feel joy, and sometimes even love. And if you refuse to acknowledge your sexuality, it gets twisted into shame, compulsion, or repression that affects your relationships and your sense of aliveness. The shadow doesn't disappear because you ignore it. It just controls you in ways you can't see. Real transformation, the kind the goddesses demand, includes the shadow. It includes the rage, the grief, the darkness, the wildness, the parts of you that make people uncomfortable. Persephone doesn't get to skip the underworld. Lilith doesn't come back from exile and become acceptable. Kali doesn't apologize for her destruction. And you don't get to become whole by claiming the parts of yourself that are easy, nice, or palatable. And only those parts, right? Shadow work is the descent. It's uncomfortable. It's messy. It's not Instagrammable, but it's where the real medicine is. So if you can't fix the shadow and you can't transcend it, what do? Right? I mean, I guess that's why you're here. And my answer is you integrate it. Shadow integration means bringing the disowned parts back into consciousness. Not to heal them, not to make them acceptable, but to own them, to let them be part of you again. This isn't a one-time thing. Shadow work is not a project you complete. It's an ongoing relationship, a practice, a way of living. You don't finish integrating your shadow. You keep meeting it in different forms, at different depths throughout your life. This is the spiral, right? And I'd love to give you some examples because integration is complicated and nuanced. And that's one of the hardest parts of all of this is there are no black and white answers, right? So here's what integration looks like in practice. You notice when you're judging someone else. That judgment, that's your shadow. Whatever you judge in others is something you've disowned in yourself. So you ask, what part of me am I rejecting that I'm seeing in them? Shadow work is noticing when you feel triggered, reactive, disproportionately angry or afraid. That reaction, that's your shadow trying to get your attention. So you pause. You feel into your body. You ask, what's underneath this? What part of me needs to be seen? You notice when you feel shame. Shame is the shadow's favorite hiding place. So instead of pushing the shame away, you turn toward it. You ask, what is the shame protecting? What am I afraid will happen if I own this part of myself? And these are hard questions to ask. But shadow integration is bringing compassion to the parts of you that you've been at war with. It's saying, you're allowed to be here. You're a part of me. I don't have to like you, but I'm not going to exile you anymore. And sometimes, often, shadow integration means letting those parts come forward. Letting your rage speak, letting your sexuality live, letting your power take up space, letting your grief be felt. The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to be integrated. It wants to stop being hidden. It wants to make you whole. And the goddesses, they're the ones who guide this work because they live in the shadow. They are the exiled, the rejected, the too much, the fierce, the wild, the uncontrollable. When you work with Lilith, you're integrating your exiled sexuality and rage. When you work with Medusa, you're integrating your protective power and your too muchness. When you work with Persephone, you're integrating your capacity to rule the underworld. Next episode, we start diving into the goddesses in deeper layers than you may have heard before. Because the goddesses teach you how to be whole, not acceptable, whole. So there's one more layer I want to touch on, and that's how shadow changes you as you move through the maiden to mother journey. And we'll keep talking about this idea of the maiden to mother journey. But for now, the maiden shadow, the shadow of independence, of solo sovereignty, often includes things like need. You learned you couldn't need anyone, right? Vulnerability. You learned you had to be strong alone. Softness, right? Softness is huge, and it's in the shadow. We're so afraid of the rage in the shadow, but our softness is in the shadow too, because you learned that softness was weakness. Asking for help. You learned you had to do it all yourself, right? When you're in your maiden era, these things feel like threats. You've built your identity around not needing, not being vulnerable, not softening, not asking for help. But as you move toward mother, toward relationship, toward holding space for others, toward interdependence, those disowned parts have to come back. Because you cannot be in true partnership if you refuse all vulnerability. And you cannot hold space for others if you won't let anyone hold space for you. And so the mother shadow, and I'm still learning this, but it's the shadow of relationship and holding, right? And that often includes things like boundaries. You learned saying no was selfish. Your own needs, right? You learn to prioritize everyone else's needs. Rage. You learned that mothers, caretakers don't get to be angry. And your wildness. You learned that mothers have to be responsible, contained. And I mean mother in the broadest terms. I don't just mean biologically women and people with wombs who have had children. I mean mother archetypally. So as you move into mother, you have to reclaim these parts of your shadow because you can't hold space for others if you have no boundaries. You can't be in a relationship if you've abandoned yourself. This is the spiral. The shadow doesn't just go away. It shows you different faces as you evolve. And this is why I teach from the threshold. I'm in the middle of this. I'm learning to integrate maiden shadow, letting myself be vulnerable with my partner, asking for help, softening, and mother shadow, reclaiming my boundaries, letting my wildness live even as I hold space. The work never ends. It just goes deeper. Before we close, I want to offer you a shadow practice. So just take a moment to think of someone you judged recently. Someone who irritated you, triggered you, maybe made you feel uncomfortable. Now ask yourself, what quality in them bothered me? Were they too loud? Too quiet? Too confident? Too needy? Too sexual? Too intense? too nice. Whatever it is, that's your shadow. That's a part of yourself you've disowned. And it's showing up in them so you can see it, so you can reclaim it. You don't have to like them. You don't have to agree with how they express that quality. But you do have to own that it's also in you, somewhere, hidden. So just this week, see if you can notice your judgments. And instead of pushing them away, get curious. Ask, what am I rejecting in myself that I'm seeing in them? That's the beginning of shadow integration. And as always, everything we explore here lives in practice. There's a link in our bio for our free community where you'll find our ritual grimoire, embodiment library, and online workshops diving deeper into the work. And if this work is serving you and you want to support the podcast, I have a Patreon where you can get monthly new and full moon rituals, the ability to list your business in our Coven shop, and of course, podcast bonus content. That link is also in the bio. Your support helps me keep creating this content and building the Coven. And if you're listening, you're part of the Coven. So if you're loving this podcast, please leave a review. It helps us reach so many more people who are ready for this medicine. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Trust the spiral. This podcast is spiritual teaching, not therapy or medical advice.